Good morning. It's banal to say that Canada has a crisis in its constitution. And with me this morning is Premier Bill Bennett of British Columbia, one of the linchpins to any possible agreement, if such agreement is at all possible now. And Premier Bennett will be interviewed by me after the break. Mr. Bennett, can we take it as a simple fact of life that the constitutional talks from which you've just come failed miserably?
No, I don't think you can do that. I think, well, the public that saw it on television, they heard it on radio, and they got very intensive reporting, probably have a better understanding of what the country's about, at least the two different views of Canada, that of the 10 provincial premiers versus that of Prime Minister Trudeau. So in that case, it wasn't a failure. Because we didn't come to an agreement, the 10 provinces with the Prime Minister, is not a failure, because I think there is some opportunity still for agreement. But
on whom, Mr. Premier, do you put the principal blame? Why and in what language?
Well, obviously, from my point of view, the Prime Minister was inflexible, and I'll tell you why. For the first time, we as the 10 premiers have been able to, both at the meetings leading up to it, where there was a federal presence in Jean Chrétien, and then together at that conference, we're able to make great movement toward each other, adjust positions, and come to a common agreement. That's never happened in all the talks I've ever been to on any item, and for good reason, because there are regional differences, the geography is different, the cultures are different, and I had thought it gave a great opportunity for the Prime Minister to be the 11th out of the 10 that had already agreed to provide a positive constitutional package and bring some unity and spirit to the country, and he missed that opportunity.
Mr. Bennett, one thing that came through on television, a couple of remarks. One, you thought of it as the Rennie and Pierre show in part, and that there was a personal vendetta there which made things almost impossible. Am I correct?
Yes, well, I think if you were watching it on television and watched it after every item, they seemed to break down into that personal antagonism. Certainly you would get the same impression I got, and what didn't change in the private discussions that we had.
Tell me, did you too develop with Prime Minister Trudeau a personal antagonism which has become a vendetta? Because no. I watched you saying to him perhaps he would have a deathbed repentance, and I watched him replying equally cuttingly to you, well, that he would not have a deathbed repentance.
The deathbed repentance had nothing to do with him personally, but a repentance on his inflexible attitude. I never argue personalities. I have argued at that conference what I thought was good for Canada, and the Prime Minister was the odd man out. Now he and I disagree on our view of Canada, but then again, 9 other premiers disagree with his view of Canada as well. I do not agree with a strong, centralized, unitary government, because I do not believe that the business of BC can be effectively run from Ottawa. I only have to look at the way they've conducted their affairs, the massive deficits, the high inflation, the unemployment, where they have responsibility, and compare it with the administration in the West here, where BC has the lowest unemployment we've ever had, record levels of private sector capital investment, more people working, 30,000 other Canadians moving to British Columbia every year for jobs, and we're absorbing them into the market and maintaining that pace. And I say to the people who best can run British Columbia.
Mr. Bennett, when Trudeau made his final summing up, he very much impressed me that somehow you and the other premiers and the separatist, René Lévesque, agreed to a draft preamble that Canada was a free association of provinces. Is that your view?
First of all, the items we discussed with the Prime Minister were items of substance, and the preamble was not discussed in the private discussion. So what we did discuss was the items of substance that were on the agenda.
Did you agree with Lévesque that Canada was a free association of provinces?
Lévesque agrees with me that I believe that British Columbia freely joined, and we are a free association of people. And you tell me what's sinister about that. We are a free association in this country. We're not held together by force.
To me, sir, if I may inject an opinion, a constitution with a draft preamble of free association of peoples would be taken by Levesque as an implicit right of self-determination and separation if necessary. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't agree with that.
Is that what Levesque thinks?
Well, don't ask me to speak for Mr. Levesque, but I know that this association of free association is basic to democracy, and it's the way this country was built. We weren't a country that was developed by force. We were a country that was developed by free choice of joining. When British Columbia joined Canada in 1871, it was a free choice, and it was a controversial choice inside British Columbia at the time. But it was a free choice of the majority of people at that time, given a number of options, to join Canada rather than the United States, or what was the preferable option for the people at that time, and that was to go it alone. But they were afraid of, A, territorial ambitions of the United States at that time, because they just purchased Alaska, and they felt threatened. Britain, at that particular time, was not interested in protecting their interest. They were not so they really, their choice was between two systems, a sort of unitary federal system like the United States, or a federal system such as Canada had, which would leave them ownership of their resources, leave them their regional opportunity to develop, and that's why they chose Canada.
Well,
and
of
it
course,
was a good choice.
But what sticks, obviously, in Trudeau's craw is anything in a constitution which said we were a free association of provinces. Will he not use that?
What would he prefer to say, that that we are here together bound by force?
No, he might use some other fancy phrases, but did you not get the feeling that that was really going to be one of his big guns in his campaigns ahead? Because you people, most amazingly to we observers on the West Coast, agreed with Levesque.
No, I think the actual phrasing of that phrasing was developed by, in my recollection, was advanced by Brian Peckford of Newfoundland.
Brian Peckford of Newfoundland is a stronger provincial rightist than you are, than you are.
Brian Peckford has reason to want to develop their economy. They're the poorest part of Canada. He doesn't want to be on the dole, as he said, and receive equalization. He wants to develop an economy where they can stand on their own feet. They have that opportunity with their offshore resources. I agree with them. I agree that they can develop their economy, and I want to give them that chance. And I agree with them.
If Pierre Trudeau, as now appears probable, comes back with a federal plan for patriation of the Constitution, would that give you cause for an election in British Columbia?
No, I don't. First of all, the two provinces that have the most recent mandate is Newfoundland and British Columbia, the bookends of the country. I think we got ours in May of 1979, which was just last year, and they got theirs in June. So I'm not considering that as an option. Our mandate extends till 1984.
If Mr. McKechnie, when the budget come down, imposes a tax on natural gas, would you rule out the possibility of an election to fight that grab at your provincial revenues?
Well, there are, I guess, a number of ways you would fight that. You'd fight it on principle and the very spirit of the country. You could, maybe there are legal ways, which we look into. There certainly is taking the fight to the people is another option. I'm counting on their some common sense and some understanding of the country that they won't proceed with that proposed natural gas export tax or an energy export tax. And we intend to fight it very strongly on behalf of the people of British Columbia, and I'll tell you why.
Any energy export tax additional to what is on oil at the moment, you will fight to the bitter end?
Absolutely. What they would do in this instance, those resources have been developed as part of the provincial economy. They belong to the people of British Columbia. Does that mean that we're greedy and not sharing them? Not at all. Because in their development, the tremendous exploration that we've encouraged in the Northeast, we have thousands of people employed, a lot of capital investment. Those people are paying income tax to the federal government. They collect actually more money in taxation from the development of our resources than we do through personal income tax, corporate income tax, the purchasing power that has them pay the hidden federal sales tax that's on all the goods we buy. They do better than we do if it's just taxation revenue. Now, where we get our revenue is from the direct taxation because we own the resource.
Understood,
That's
sir.
in our budget now. And it's on the strength of that being in our budget now, projected into the future, that we can bring in the extended health care, that we can propose Dentacare, that we can share with the municipalities. If they pluck that out of the pockets, those services could disappear, plus personal tax increases to our people.
How would you like
I will
to-
never let them do that to the people of British Columbia.
And to stop them doing that, what are your courses of action?
Well, they're varied, and I wouldn't want to discuss them now because rather than rattle, I want to rattle a specific saber. I want to argue just the principle, not how I intend to fight it, but the principle is that is not in the spirit of trust and equity on which this country is founded. Any government, federal government, that would impose such a discriminatory tax on only two provinces primarily to pick up the cash right out of the pockets of the people certainly isn't governing the Canada that we know.
And, sir, as Lalonde said to me the other day, and I've got the transcript here, not planning discriminatory taxes at the present time. They might tax everything, all forms of energy. That's something that we have said has to be looked at. Is your attitude the same on an export tax on all form of energy?
Yes, and I've said that since the beginning. It's not just natural gas because you still only have a few provinces that produce and export energy.
Well,
and they can play the game of a very light tax on electrical energy or hydro, which will be minimal. Won't hurt the people of Quebec and try and soften it to them to go after the larger pile of cash that's in Alberta and British Columbia that they perceive to be there for the plucking.
But, Mr. Bennett, you've explained it well, but if the worst came to the worst, would you rule out an election on that issue?
I would think we should have a federal election on that issue, and the government that is the aggressor should be the one to put their case before the people of not only Canada, but the people in the West. But I want to say that's difficult for us because the West has already rejected them.
Webster and Premier Bennett on the constitutional crisis after the break.
They didn't conquer tactic. Buy you off, get you to forgive.
Premier Bennett, and he'll correct me if I'm wrong, made it perfectly clear that if there's a unilateral federal action to impose export taxes, additional export taxes on energy, including natural gas, that you consider that's a matter the federal government should first take to the people.
They're the aggressor. They would be changing the historical way of dealing in this country. They're trying to set it on a precedent of the oil export tax that was agreed to in crisis of 1974. And I don't think Saskatchewan should be exporting its heavy oil anyhow. I would like to see them develop refining facilities that have the capability of dealing with that oil and keeping it within Canada. It's just that the facilities that process it are in the United States.
Is it the lack of price agreement, which means that Alberta and to some extent Manitoba are presently subsidizing the East with $3 billion a year in oil levels?
You mean Saskatchewan and Alberta?
Yes.
I don't think that those provinces, when they sell the product within the country, ever set out to be usurious to the people of Canada. What they're doing now is selling their oil, which is a depleting natural resource, to the rest of Canada at less than half the value. Here you get the federal government paying Mexico $38, and they're paying a barrel. And what are they paying other Canadians? $16 a barrel. Now you've got to say, gee, it's better to be a Mexican when you deal with the federal government of Canada than it is to be a Canadian province.
Mind you, it does keep the price down for all of us all across the country, does it not?
That's a fictitious price, and what it does, it's encouraged waste. We're still the highest wasters of energy in the world, are Canadians, and it does not allow us to set realistic priorities on our use of energy. There's a waste of energy, of petroleum energy, in transportation. It has not allowed the price to rise to values, Jack, in which the alternative energy sources, which we're trying to develop in British Columbia, liquefaction of coal, the use of LNG for mode of transport, those things, because you have a fictitious price here.
But sir, we have a fictitious...
It's a political delusion that they practice, a sleight of hand that the federal government of Pierre Elliott Trudeau practiced so well. It is the most disastrous economic policy that any government has pursued. Other governments in the world have dealt with energy and oil pricing. Japan, West Germany, their people have dealt with the real cost, as it is in world terms, and their economies are booming. 2
points, sir. You want, therefore, Canadian internal oil to come to something close to world price.
That's not what that's not even what they're saying. What Alberta has offered in Saskatchewan is to go to a percentage of not world price, but U.S. price, which is lower than world price.
75% of the Chicago price.
But they're not saying that they'll do that overnight. They'll phase into it over a number of years. I've got to tell you that the policy up until now, the fearfulness of the federal government, the political expediency of catering to the motorists of Ontario to get votes in the last election, and it paid off for them. Ontario, Central Canada elected them. They control that federal government. Has paid off electorally, but they've done it at the peril of the country. The rest of the world looks aghast at the lack of a common sense energy policy. In fact, a lack of any energy policy in this country. They look at Canada that has no economic policy. 3 years ago, we had a conference in Ottawa on economic policy. We took detailed proposals from BC. We haven't heard a word from the federal government yet on implementing those policies in which we try to make our country stronger.
Might be unfair, sir, but let me remind you that we get our natural gas from British Columbia vastly subsidized by our resources. $1.20 a thousand cubic feet.
That will be phased in, but it'll always be lower because we're using it to try and use a provincial resource to help the development of industry here, because we've been penalized by the economic policies of the country for years that have held us captive as consumers for Central Canada industry. We want to locate secondary industry. We want to develop a more sophisticated economy. We want jobs for our people. That's jobs for Canadians. And we want to see an economy that is not just resource-oriented, but can get into processing and refining,
fair enough, sir.
manufacturing.
But let's get back to the Constitution. What do you think Pierre is going to do now? What will his plan be? You have a good idea from all these talks. What attempt he will... Let me put it this way. If he wanted to bring back to this country the BNA Act as is, with the present amending formula in the Act by custom, would you support that?
Well, look, I've always said that we should have our Constitution in Canada. There's no doubt. But to do it, you're not going to, just to do that simple act. The only reason for doing it is to raise the Canadian spirit, unite the Canadian family. To do it unilaterally in a divisive way would serve no useful purpose. Bringing the Constitution back won't create one new job, won't put another sandwich in anyone's lunch pail, won't cut inflation, won't deal with our economic problems. It is, so what would be the purpose of that simple act?
Could then be amended in years ahead.
It should be a spiritual act to reunite the country, to make us feel a national presence, all parts being part of bringing that Constitution back.
Would you agree with that?
Well, if we all agreed, but to bring it back
as such
and say I'm going to do it no matter what you say,
time.
and say René Lévesque, I don't have to listen to you because I beat you in a referendum, and Brian Peckford, the people of Newfoundland mean nothing to us electorally, or to the western provinces, look, you didn't elect any Liberals in the federal election, so I don't have to listen to you, I'm going to bring it back anyhow. What would be the purpose? It's one man.
It's a possibility, though. Would you go to court on it if he did?
But it's one man's personal goal, timetable. And I say, don't work to your own timetable, Prime Minister Trudeau. Work to a Canadian timetable. I've suggested next year, 1981, the first opportunity to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Statute of Westminster, which was the statute that took Canada out of colonial status, would be July 1st, Canada Day in 1981. Let's all go together.
Did Prime Minister Trudeau tell you that if you supported his constitutional agreement, he would resign?
in June 9th, when he was first talking about it, he says, you know, this is my priority, and he says, I'm not going to run another term, and I'm going to leave, and he says, that might be an inducement for some of you to get agreement. He said it with a smile. I took it as a great offer, but one in which the principles of what we were fighting for were worth more than his
You wouldn't give away the country merely just to have Trudeau resign, is that it?
No.
Jokingly, we're saying this.
Yes, sure.
But what if Mr. Trudeau tries to bring back federal entrenchment from London in his own areas of language and federal laws?
Oh, he should. Well, first of all, I don't know what his purpose is. You see, a constitution should be the result of agreement on all parts. You see, the reason the Fathers of Confederation were able to develop a country at all and build a constitution is it was provinces getting together. There was no federal government. By their getting together, they created one. The problem of amending it is not amongst the provinces now who agree or who are the people that put together the country. It's that federal government we created who is the stumbling block on everything we try to do.
Sir, you've got lawyers and advisors coming out of your ears. Can he attempt to do that, to bring back the Constitution with some federal rights and civil or criminal laws entrenched? Can he?
He could attempt to do anything. Whether he could be successful or whether we could successfully oppose him would be a matter of both legal opinion and action taken on that.
If he did, you'd try to stop him.
Yeah, but I just say, Jack, let's get back to basic. What is the purpose?
No need for it now.
There is not a constitutional crisis, although constitutional amendment would be desirable.
Is it a political crisis?
He could create a political crisis, and that's the problem. That's the part that disturbs me, is the Prime Minister is set his own deadline, his own timetable, his own conditions, and he said, come heck or high water, that he's going to proceed. I say nation building is too important to get caught up in the ego of a single individual.
Premier Bennett and Webster, more after this break. I've got one of the leaked documents in my hand, Mr. Bennett, the one that says the federal document.
That's a federal document.
Federal document by Kirby. The probability of an agreement is not high. In the event unilateral action by the feds becomes necessary, ministers should understand that the fight in Parliament and the country will be very, very rough. How did you get your copy of the document?
Well, it's one of those things that was delivered under our door late at night on the Sunday night. I think each provincial delegation was sent a copy, so that's how we got it.
Was that a spy in the federal government trying to give you information, or the federal government trying to put you on edge?
I've been around government long enough that I wonder why working papers we have in our government end up in all sorts of hands of the opposition. So I guess it's just part of government that these things get out, but it's not the fact that it got out. The disturbing thing is the content, that they were approaching the conference not in a view to making it a success, but in a view to manipulating the conference for their own point of view. Now, my feeling in the country is that I've been working towards this conference because I saw the need for some constitutional amendment that could help improve the efficiency and the ability of government to govern in this country, both federal and provincial, to deal with areas that were silent or unclear in the BNA Act. To have such an attitude expressed in an official document by a government, to me, is unthinkable in a federation in which cooperation.
But it gave you an edge. It gave you an edge on the strategy. But let me ask this question, referring back to Trudeau's closing statement on the Saturday morning: was there one single thing that you and the other premiers, after your Chateau Laurier breakfast, actually offered to the federal government?
Yes.
He said it was all one way, nothing from you people.
Well, first of all, what we were trying to do is agree amongst ourselves of what we thought would be good constitutional amendment for the country. Not everything suggested we felt was most appropriately served in the Constitution. So we came to agreement on our view of the country, the regional nature of the country, still having a strong federal system, a strong federal government, those things that we thought would be best.
You're going around in circles.
No, I'm just finishing. And we made an agreement. There was compromise amongst us. There was compromise amongst us. We moved to each other's positions to get that agreement. Now, yes, but we had moved towards the federal position. Let me take
powers over the economy.
Let me take the first one, and I'll show you where a lot of movement was made, and that was on the restructured upper house. British Columbia's original proposals called for the extension of regional representation, which is the basis for the present Senate in Canada. It's a 4-region Canada. We wanted 5 regions with representation on that basis. That was not acceptable to the other provinces, although they agreed the present Senate wasn't working in one of its capacities. And so we moved that we would have equal provincial representation as part of the upper house with provincially appointed delegates. Now, that part of the provincially appointed Senate or upper house would only vote and deal with amendments that affected provincial rights, like the declaratory power, or where the federal legislation would intrude into provincial areas, which they can do under emergency powers or declaratory powers, and on a very short list of items. The broader function of the Senate would have those provincial representatives and federal representatives as the house of sober second thought that would not veto or stop federal legislation.
In federal fields solely?
In federal and national fields, and what it would do is give the provinces a structured house in which regional representation or provincial representation could be made when the federal government passed legislation that was intruding on provincial constitutional powers.
In other words, your suggestion, the consensus among the 10 provincial premiers that morning said, we will not allow you to use the great and good order of the country or the declaratory powers. We will veto anything which comes into the provincial field.
But no, first of all, it gave them the opportunity to debate it. Then there would have to be a majority within that House that would vote against it.
Trudeau said, you see, he would not accept a reformed Senate which was allowed to veto federal legislation.
Well, it would only veto the short list that dealt with provincial responsibilities. Now, what he said is he wants a free hand to emasculate the provinces, is what he said.
Which he now has under his declaratory powers, does he not?
He has it as a declaratory power for the national good. That's to help us in time of war.
Or War Measures Act.
Carefully used and cautiously used, it would be used very rarely, if at all. To be abused would not be in the spirit of that power being granted and would destroy the country as well. What we want is a proper forum for the people of the provinces to be able to deal with any move to make sure that it was in the interest, and quite properly, in a case of emergency or a war, they would be given the right. They would be endorsed.
But would that not make the provinces more powerful?
No.
Certainly than under the present Constitution. More powerful than Ottawa.
But it would never happen. Where you have strong federal systems that work, like West Germany, they have that right.
But I can see why he dug in his heels on that one.
Just a second. West Germany, with their states governments, have that. They never have to use it because they've never had to use a combined veto because, Jack, they talk things over in advance. You don't have the type of action by the government of West Germany saying to heck with what the country says, we're going ahead, right or wrong, and we've got the power to do it. This gives you a forum to discuss it rationally in front. You take Switzerland, which the Prime Minister tried to quote it as an example of a good federal system. It's so good it doesn't even have a capital city. It is an association of states that run the wealthiest country and the most successful country in the world.
Yeah, but I can see why his nose without a joint on that.
Not at all, because they agreed to it. And originally, the concept was agreed to. It had come through the Council of Ministers. The reason the federal representation was not mentioned in this proposal, because it was an interim step. Why was it an interim step? Because federal people say, we can't move on the senators we've got now and reduce them because we'd have to have a phase-in period so we could deal with the numbers. Really, it was at their request that we had an interim step and didn't do the total Senate reform in one major proposal, such as we had encouraged. It was accommodating them.
Heavy stuff, but we're going to have to tackle the powers over the economy where Ottawa wanted specific things and the premiers refused to give them.
Well, they already have powers over the economy, and the way they're proposing to use those, I could not extend them more.
After the break. It's all very important, Mr. Bennett. And you say there's no crisis. Of course there's a crisis. But I want to give you a little test, right?
All right.
I want you to go down the items discussed at the Constitution and give me succinctly what Trudeau said on, for instance, patriation of the Constitution. Were you near agreement on that at all?
We never got to that as the item. Deal with the items of substance first.
Charter of Rights.
Charter of Rights, the provinces felt that they were more appropriate in legislation, and he holds an opposite view. In that area, we never got a chance to talk about a compromise. He just,
equalization payments.
except for the wording, we agreed that we could say in the Constitution, and we agreed amongst ourselves that we could deal with standards of equity amongst peoples of this country. Yes, of course.
Equalization stayed. Everybody agreed on equalization.
Yeah, we would have to get the drafters to put in the exact wording because there's differences of opinion on how the
Reform of the Senate, Trudeau said no.
The provinces agreed, and British Columbia had been flexible and moved a long way, and so had the others. And he said, we'll have to discuss that. We'll put it to some future date.
The Supreme Court, with Quebec pushing for an increase in the number to 11.
I think we could have. The provinces, I think we finally agreed that we could agree with the present number and work out a formula in which we could deal with the civil law, which they have in Quebec, by perhaps paneling. So we had come to an agreement without any increase.
All right. Family law.
Well, family law, again, is of interest to Quebec and Ontario, and the rest of us we want easier access and cheaper access to provincial court, but I don't want to set up any Renos in Canada, and it was allowing provincial opt-in, and those provinces weren't going to set up with safeguards that they wouldn't become divorce havens, and I think we'd agreed on that.
Fisheries.
Fisheries, the Prime Minister just said no. We had agreed that we could have some concurrency. Now, I agree that gave the federal government some problems, and I have a step into the middle proposal that I was trying to make, but because he was so rigid, we couldn't do it, and that was to say, look, set it up that the opportunities there in the Constitution for provinces, the three fishing areas, the West Coast, the Atlantic, and then, of course, the Hudson's Bay region, to opt in, if they can get an agreement where there's one or more provinces, to management of the ocean fisheries.
You were not doing a Peckford and demanding total control of the 200-mile limit for your fisheries.
Well, we thought that would be desirable because we don't have any interprovincial squabbles on the West Coast, but we don't have the capability or the management yet. It would have to be done over a number of years. So what we looked for was a phase-in just to give that opportunity, but again, and we were trying to help rationalize some of the disputes between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, but again, he rejected it out of hand. We never got to those other positions.
Because we weren't making a big fuss about fisheries for BC, were you?
Yes, I think because we don't have any other provinces on the West Coast, we could develop the capability, enhance our fishing, and also protect our environment better. There's a lot of dispute now between the province and federal only because we're not in communication. But now that we've developed the multiple resource use amongst our ministries, we would have better control of preventing the type of things that happen that create such disputes, but we couldn't do it overnight or even next year.
Okay, offshore resources. You've lived quite happily with offshore resources.
No, I haven't. I have been attempting to get offshore resources.
Okay, you in Newfoundland wanted clear jurisdiction on offshore resources.
First of all the provinces agreed that the same offshore resources should be treated the same as resources that are on land or under fresh water.
And Trudeau said?
No, out of hand. Now, see, you've got to remember that Ontario, with Lake Superior, with a body of water that's larger than some of the offshore areas of these provinces, has the mineral resources and gets gas and gets things out of under the Great Lakes. Now, what's different between freshwater and saltwater? Now, there again, British Columbia was prepared to help the federal government with a compromise. The Prime Minister said no other federal system has done it. Well, he's wrong. Australia has granted to the states, or not granted, but agreed that the states own the resources out to the 12-mile limit. Then they would share jurisdiction from the 12-mile out to the 200-mile limit, and that could have been a good compromise, except we would have to write in something special for Newfoundland because their resources are 190 miles away, but they are unique because they're an island. and we could give them that unique status.
Well, this all seems to be going from the feds to you.
No, first of all, they're getting nothing out there now. I don't think they're capable. We have no offshore development. It's been under moratorium for years on the West Coast. We have a split jurisdiction now. The feds won a court case giving them the outer waters. We've won a court case giving us the straits, which would really take us out to those areas where the greatest probability of exploration is. It's to end settling these things in the court. We're trying to get some rationalization. Now Australia's done it. We could, and we're not Australia, we should be able to do it better.
Powers over the economy. Ottawa was quite specific. They wanted to prohibit the provinces from erecting trade barriers. They wanted to stop this nonsense of people not being eligible for jobs in Newfoundland.
That sounds great in principle. We all agree in principle of free movement of people, especially BC, because we have no restrictions. People move here freely and get jobs here. We do have, because the provincial government is the government of the people of BC, some residency requirement. You have to have been here for public service so many months to be able to apply, and that's to give our own people a chance to get jobs in their own government first. Then other Canadians are welcome.
Was he inflexible on that?
Well, we had a great argument on it because, you see, he's presuming the federal government is fair in the way it has applied the free movement of people policy in the past. But, you know, the federal government has had discriminatory ways in which the country has worked now. They have their national policy, finance policy, has been to protect central Canada manufacturing with quotas and tariffs, which have drove industry out of the Atlantic provinces over the last 113 years, denied the full opportunity for other areas, and we've had the privilege of buying higher priced goods. Yeah. And you know, it costs British Columbians $1 billion a year in higher prices.
Anyway, you wouldn't give an inch on his increased powers over the economy, not an inch.
I think we could have made a general statement in the principles of the Constitution. That is in principles. What he wanted to do is to put things that would leave it open to interpretation to the courts. And again, his whole thing is to have the country revert to decisions by the courts. More and more, our country would be run by judges, such as the United States.
Would be run by judges. Let's take that in a separate segment. But first of all, on communications, did he not offer you control over cable TV and telephone companies?
Well, you know, I could take the first rationalization step. The problem is that I agreed to the interprovincial nature that both Saskatchewan and Quebec felt strongly about, and BC too, where it's on telephone. And I'll tell you why. Giving us regulation over BC telephone gives us the headache area and the problem of just local rates, but 25% of the revenue comes from interprovincial.
You don't want control over BC telephone?
Oh, yes, we do. But I say we should have control of the interprovincial as well, so to be able to control that other part of revenue to give a balanced look. Now, I think we could have got general agreement in that.
He said no as far as...
No, because we never got into the specifics. The provincial position was
Do you think
close.
that on the...
I think we were close enough to... You see, I still think we could, if we'd spent 2 days and and everybody was willing to roll up their sleeves, we could have achieved something.
Do you think he felt on the Saturday after your Friday meeting that you'd all ganged up, given them a kind of slim package of apparent agreement among everybody, including Levesque? He said, "The hell with you." No.
Well, you know, I don't know what's so sinister about provinces agreeing with each other, because that's the basis of the country. There's nothing sinister about that. You see,
But he wasn't there when you agreed.
His people have been in on the basis of these discussions through the ministers' meetings with Chrétien. Nothing was said that hasn't been said before. Nothing was done that hasn't been on the table before. There was no surprises, except we've developed, as I say, some compromises that we think could have broken the deadlock, because British Columbia wanted to see an agreement.
Webster and Premier Bennett. Next question will be, does Trudeau want a US-type constitution, which would put the country in the hand of the judges instead of the hands of the lawmakers? After the break. Mr. Bennett, my bias shows in this one. Does Premier Trudeau, in your opinion, looking at what he said and did on the entrenchment of rights, not just language, but our common law, does he want a US-type constitution where everything would be handled by judges of the Supreme Court of Canada in the final analysis?
Yes, he sees Canada more in the spirit of 1776 than the spirit of 1871. Many people left the United States as UELs when the Americans won, not because they didn't like the country, but it was not their style of democracy.
Do you support him on that view at all?
I certainly don't. I believe, number one, in the common law, that we have every right until government takes it away, and governments are responsive to the people then, and you have access to them to defeat them or change them, and rather than the civil law, which he's developing, is you don't have any right unless we write it in the Constitution. Well, I think they leave too many things out. They leave it to interpretation. Many progressive changes have been held back in the United States, such as the abolition of slavery under their rights written into their Constitution. It took them years to get a Supreme Court to interpret it that it wasn't interference with private property.
Does this indicate to you that there is a conflict between the French-Canadian and the, putting it broadly, English view of the different kinds of laws?
No, because I think you had have a French-Canadian in Premier Levesque who supported the majority of the people there, that he would prefer to see it within the parliaments. And it goes back to my belief in parliaments and government, whether it's the Parliament of Canada or the legislature, that you elect people, they're accountable to the people have access to defeat them or re-elect them or change them or affect their views. Judges are like diamonds. Judges are forever. And the public have no access to them. And to the best, even with the high confidence I have in the court system and the courts, it is not the principle of justice. It means that their interpretation will affect government. And instead, they will end up governing the country, and that's not democracy to me.
Mind you, we do need protection from bad governments in the Constitution. Well, or is our only protection the X every 5 years maximum?
The best protection people have is for the free elections, and we have that, and we agreed that should be in the Constitution, although we have it in our own Constitution now, and that is there must be elections within every 5 years.
You're saying it's better for the people to be able to throw the rascals out than to be at the interpretation of a bunch of judges, no matter how fine they are, because over the years they may well become a packed court.
Well, you saw that in the United States, where I guess under Roosevelt, to be able to get government legislation through, openly went out and said he was going to pack the Supreme Court. Since then, successive presidents have tried to pack the Supreme Court with judges of their philosophical persuasion. That's ridiculous.
You are therefore dead set against the entrenchment of our common law in a constitutional bill.
Yes, you could get away with, I suppose, fundamental freedoms, but we have them, and I think it's better dealt with parliaments and legislatures, but with bills of rights, which we've been holding ours up, waiting for this constitutional discussion to get finished, because we have a provincial Bill of Rights that we are intending to introduce.
It won't have any more force than common law, though, will it?
Yes, because other laws will all have to relate to it. But if it is inequitable, you see, it can be changed
By the legislature?
Yes.
Merely a statute? Yeah. The NDP government, when they get in, can change it?
But they wouldn't. You see, they wouldn't change it because it's very difficult to change it if you're taking things away from people. But if it needs better interpretation, and it's in fact holding up rights of people or hurting them, then they've got to do something about it. Alberta has a Bill of Rights, and they've had to make some changes to theirs where they found out it was hurting people.
Mr. Bennett, there is one thing that Mr. Trudeau must do, and I think you'll agree, in his patriation plan for the Constitution, to which he is committed, correct?
Yes.
He must move to entrench minority language rights, French and English, in all federal fields. You would support that. If he did that, that's his business, correctly?
I think the federal government could do that. We have French language rights now in the BNA Act. We have...
restricted, sir, to certain areas of the country.
Yeah, but to Parliament and to certain areas.
Courts in Quebec.
I've always said, and Premier Levesque agrees, that it would be foolish to impose French, say, on the people of BC when less than 1.5% of our people are francophone. But you've got to have a government out here that provides them with opportunity as Canadians to get, like when they move here and their children come to our
but
schools,
Mr. Bennett,
instruction in French and teaching in French, which we already have in our school system, and that's available by option to school districts on need.
But Mr. Bennett, you shouldn't have quoted Levesque, because the last thing he wants is fair treatment by statute for French Canadians in education.
You asked me about a viewpoint. Now, I'm just saying the Prime Minister could do it in the federal sphere, which means federal services would have that.
In other words, all he would do would be entrench the Official Languages Act.
Yes.
If he attempted to move
He couldn't move it into the provincial sphere.
If he attempted to move that into the provincial sphere, would there be any provinces that would support him on the basis of the premiers at the conference?
I would think where there was a demonstrable need, probably Premier Hatfield.
Only Premier Hatfield, not Premier Davis.
No, I don't.
No?
I don't. Well, I can't speak for him, but I would say Premier
I'm talking
Hatfield
about
only
the
because
performance.
Premier Hatfield has made that statement, and because their province is probably got the most equal mix of French Canadians and Anglophones at about a 35-65 or 40-60 split.
So there you went, sir, after how many years? The Victoria Charter was 1970, 71?
Well, I said to the Prime Minister, though, he kept at the beginning of the conference, he said, you know, the reason I want to do it, there's been too many failures. He says, I remember 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, and all the different conferences. And I said, Prime Minister, we have a chance to achieve it now, and you have a chance to break your record of failure, because the only person here that's been involved in all those failures has been yourself, Prime Minister Trudeau, and perhaps you should take a look, that maybe it's been your inflexibility that's created the failures all this time.
You are now facing Mr. Bennett, this is the leader of one of the wealthy provinces of the country and powerful ones, unilateral action by Trudeau. How rough, according to the Kirby memo and according to your view, how very rough will the fight become?
I don't know. I noticed a change, now very small, but before the conference, the Prime Minister was making statements like, if those premiers, squabbling premiers, can't agree, then I'm going to go to that conference and I'm going to unilaterally take action. Well, the fact that the premiers weren't a squabbling bunch but in fact were able to move together and agree together. He has softened that statement, and his statement at the end of the conference was, well, I will consult with my caucus and my government members on advice on how I should proceed from now. So, I mean, that is at least moderating the original position. Now, after the warnings that we've given, and after the good discussion that took place at the conference for all to see, I'm hoping that the advice he gets from his colleagues is, look, we are trustees in the federal government for just a short period of time of this country called Canada. We can make it stronger, and we can make it stronger by recognizing it has grown on the strengths of its regions, or we have the ability to willfully and unilaterally divide this country in a way it's never been divided. Prime Minister Trudeau, they should say to him, do you want to go down in history as the Prime Minister, through stubbornness and through a personal timetable, broke up Canada? Do you want to be known as the person who separated Canada and then became Canada's only successful separatist? Do you want to become the person whose proposals set out to separate the people of BC from their heritage, their money, and the people of Alberta from their money? Or do you want to go down and swallow your pride, take a deathbed repentance, which I've offered him, go back to the bargaining table, and say, we were close to agreement, we've had a chance, let's get together as of this January, let's work to an agreement for next July 1st of '81, let's in an act of unity bring a constitution, an amended constitution with full agreement to Canada. Let's make it a period of celebration of the rebirth of federalism.
You stressed money a bit too much. You made it sound as if it all boils down to money for Alberta and BC.
No, I only threw that in as an aside.
But are you saying at the same time that unless his caucus tells him this, there is a distinct danger this country will break up?
I say if depending on how far he goes on a number of proposals, how many peoples he leaves out of his decisions by disregarding their view, how he changes the course of this nation to a centralist, unitary, republican state rather than the federal state such as we are now, would certainly make many people across the country, and I'm not talking about governments, take a look at what's happened to the Canadian dream, because the Canadian dream has never been the Trudeau dream. The Trudeau dream has been something far different. I was hoping he would catch the spirit of the country at the conference when he listened to the premiers. They're closer to the people. They don't get their opinions of what the people think through gold farm polls, Jack Webster. They get their feeling of the people by listening to them. I take a lot of shots. I take them from you, and I take them from the public. I get advice. I also get some encouragement. And I've found out the letters and telegrams I've had from across this country in the hundreds and hundreds during and since that conference makes me believe that the Trudeau vision of Canada is not the vision the people of Canada have had or do have now.
I wish you put all that together in one short sentence, because I get the distinct impression that your belief is that the Trudeau vision of Canada is a Republican US-type country with a strong central government, with an entrenched Bill of Rights from coast to coast, disregarding the English common law attitude, putting it in the hands of the judges instead of the lawmakers. Is that not really what you've been telling me?
That's what I've been telling you, yes.
Why didn't you say it yourself?
Well, I don't have that good Scottish accent. I don't have your newsman's way for putting a headline on a good story.
Does he want to dump the monarchy?
I don't know. I don't know, Jack. I just don't know.
Would that split the country?
Pardon?
Would that split the country?
You know, why would anyone attack the monarchy when you know, in the time of politics?
I almost said Mr. Trudeau. Mr. Bennett, I'm sure many people watched the Constitutional Conference. I'm sure many people have become perhaps a little confused about the detail we've given this morning. Do you think the people of British Columbia, Kamloops and East, Kelowna and East, really give it a damn about the federal-provincial fighting over power and money?
No, I think they trust their governments to come up with a common sense solution, and they just want to see better government, more efficient government. They would only become incensed when what they thought they had was taken away, and that's what I'm trying to prevent the federal government from taking things away. I think we can continue to build a strong Canada. You know, we've got a country that's the envy of much of the world. It's not what we are now, though. It's what we can be, and we can be even better. And we can, these things that were unanticipated in the Constitution, like communications and things, and we've got government overlap and heavy bureaucracy, and the people are paying for it, and they say, clean it up.
That's what it all means to me. More federal-provincial cooperation means more bureaucrats.
No, it will eliminate them by giving one side or the other the jurisdiction and clearing up those areas in which the Constitution is silent. I'm trying to eliminate bureaucracy.
The poll the other day, the Gallup poll, said that 59% of the people of British Columbia or Western Canada, I'm not quite sure which, would approve unilateral action to repatriate the...
No, they said 60% said they would like to see the Constitution back in Canada. Only half of them said they would accept unilateral action. I would have thought 100% of Canadians would say we want our Constitution in our country, and I thought nobody would agree with one government taking it back unilaterally and perhaps dividing the country. So,
well, as you said earlier on, if they brought it back on the present basis, just moved the paper from here to there, that would be acceptable to a point.
What's it do?
Makes it a Canadian BNA Act. Then you'd repass the Act or something.
Canadian BNA Act now.
Doesn't annoy you that it's sitting in Britain?
I would like I'd like the opportunity with doing these improvements to the Constitution, clarifying it, improving it, and not writing things into it for the sake of writing things into it, that it would be a useful time to bring it back, and it's a great spirit of unity. That's what it's like a flag. A flag is to unify a country. A constitution, government action should be positive. It shouldn't be negative and bickering. And the federal government should be the last ones to be the source of the bickering.
The really important things were the entrenchment of language and civil rights, the powers over the Constitution, and the control of revenue from resources. These were the real key issues.
Those are key issues.
These are the key issues.
Yeah. The others would all be improvements, but there's nothing there that's an emergency. Like the country isn't going to fall apart tomorrow if there's no Constitution amendment, or if it isn't brought back. It's desirable, not mandatory.
Mr. Bennett, let's try maybe a couple of short telephone segments.
Sure.
on the Constitution to see if we've spread enlightenment or confusion.
Yeah, could be.
After this break right now. Is this the beginning of the end, or as Trudeau said, Mr. Bennett, the end of the beginning? He used both words.
No, I think we're still, I'm an optimist. We're at the beginning of the beginning. Not the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. We're still at the beginning of the beginning. We're a young country, got lots of future.
Go ahead to Premier Bennett.
Mr. Bennett, the fellow ahead of me just asked the same question I was, but I'd like to thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. Is that all you have to say?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on, please. Go ahead to Premier Bennett.
Yes, I say that this is the most sane report I've ever heard on the Constitution. And Jack, would your station do a great public service to people?
It'll be rebroadcast at midnight tonight, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Now, Mr. Bennett,
Yes.
you've stated in the last couple of days, a couple of speeches you've made, that if these constitutional reforms of Mr. Trudeau go through, that it's going to cost us more money. One, by the upping of sales tax.
No.
Two, just a moment. And two, by cutting long-term care and the dental care plan.
No.
Now, you're already getting money from Ottawa on the sales tax. And why are you taking from the have-nots in long-term care and dental care? Why don't you take from the haves, like putting back the inheritance tax?
All right, can I answer that, because you've confused the Constitution, which is one item, with the federal government proposal, which is not part of the constitutional talks, which is part of their move to solve their deficit, because you know the federal government is running a multi-billion-dollar deficit, that they said they're going to impose an energy export tax primarily on natural gas, which would take the money out of the Alberta budget and the province of BC budget. Our services programs then are predicated on those revenues. We not only expanded, because our government brought in long-term care on the basis of those revenues, we're now able to introduce dental care later in the years. Because our projections show that not only this year, but they've been taking the money each and every year, that it will eventually work out to about $1 billion a year that they'll be taking out of the pockets of the people of British Columbia. We would have to have a reduction in these services because they were based on that money, or we would have to double the taxes to the people of British Columbia to pay for the money that the federal government is taking out of their pockets. Now, I want to tell the lady very clear, it's not constitutional. This is a desperation tax proposal of the federal government that's already in the provincial budget that they propose to take away. It's money in the pockets of the people of BC that they're going to take to solve the deficit in Ottawa. And I say, people of British Columbia, if you let them do this, you'll either lose services, and I only use these as examples of things they could lose.
Or more taxation.
Or our taxes on you provincially would have to go up just so that they could play.
There is a connection, though, sir, between the budget this year, with perhaps additional export taxes, and the powers of control over natural resources about which you are arguing in the Constitution. Is there not?
No, because we already have control of our resources.
At this moment.
Yes, and this is something they say they can do without any changes in the Constitution. So don't get this mixed up with the constitutional.
But right now, British Columbia is suffering from the $4.47 U.S. price for natural gas at the border.
Yeah, but don't confuse that either, because that is just an aberration. Why we had a shortfall in gas sales, both Alberta and BC, in this year, is number one, the U.S. is in recession. That means their business and industry is not using as much gas.
Number two.
Secondly, President Carter deregulated their gas industry down there, which in the short term filled markets we were getting, only short term. The third thing is that California does not allow the residual fuel oils to be used in their state because of pollution, so it moves up into the Pacific Northwest. Discussions with the Secretary of Energy's department in the U.S. says that will be a short-term, 6 months to 2 years maximum. They'll need all the gas under those contracts at the prices, realistic prices we can charge.
Pity we don't have a take-or-pay clause, isn't it?
Pity we don't have a take-or-pay clause.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Premier Bennett.
Good morning. Morning.
Good morning. Mr. Premier, our family felt immense pride in your personal strength and your leadership at the Premier's Conference with Trudeau. We just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. From Kamloops, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Bennett, or Jack, I'm a senior citizen.
Yeah.
My first time phoning in. I'd appreciate it if I got a chance to say these few words.
Yes.
Mr. Premier, why is Trudeau in such a desperate hurry to repeal this Constitution that has served us quite well for all these years? Anyone can see that repatriating the Constitution has, for the past year or so, become an obsession with Trudeau. He has absolutely neglected the more important issues of running Canada's Parliament during this time of stress, and it has taken him the past 11 years to finally bankrupt the federal treasury. Being the type of leader he is, in his party, he's dominant, ruthless, self-centered. He has run a one-man show, but the moment of truth has finally arrived, and thank God for that. If we give in to this last hurrah of his to satisfy his ego, it will be a sad day. And I feel sure that Churchill, if he were alive today, would best describe him as a cunning and evil man.
Thank you.
Well, I'd comment on that, man, because I think he's put what everybody's thinking. The country's got some problems. The present Prime Minister does not seem able to deal with them or willing, and that is the problems with the economy, unemployment, inflation. Instead, his total preoccupation appears to be, after 11 or 12 years as Prime Minister of this country, the Constitution, which seems to be, as the gentleman says, his own last hurrah, his timetable, what he wants to be remembered for. I don't think he wants to be remembered for the War Measures Act or other things, or the fact that the country has built up this tremendous fiscal drain and federal deficit and mounting public debt, so that a large part of our taxes now that go to Ottawa go to pay interest charges to the money lenders. The people of Canada would like to have governments that aren't in debt to the money lenders, that are going to give them full value for every dollar.
You would concede, Mr. Bennett, however, that there is a problem in the province called Quebec, which expected something after the referendum.
Yes, but you see, the Prime Minister Trudeau has been the Prime Minister that in 1968 came to this country to relieve the tensions between Quebec and the rest of the country. Instead, during his Prime Ministership, not only have they got worse, it led the people of Quebec to, in desperation, elect a government that said if we can't live within a federal system, we should separate, and that has all happened during his term. Now, that crisis developed. There are various times that I think that, given a proper perspective of the country, the things that we were able to express as premiers this last little while, with a different Prime Minister, we never would have had the events of a referendum in Quebec or separatism.
Joe could have made a deal.
I think, in retrospect now, with the type of discussions we had on a number of these issues with Joe Clark when he was Prime Minister, that he had a feeling for the province.
Do you think he could have made a deal?
Yes.
Webster and Premier Bennett, after the break. We've concentrated very soberly on the Constitution this morning so far, Mr. Bennett, but a couple of old clothes and porridge items. You created a few smiles when you said that you had delivered Brick and it wasn't your fault if it didn't grow up right. Would you mind if I put it to you that you didn't deliver the baby, that you fathered the baby? And as such, perhaps you feel very uneasy about the public concern over the millions made, perhaps perfectly properly, by people on Kaiser, and the fact that Edgar Kaiser is not only a director if the takeover goes through, but gets $13.5 million a year for his little sales company to Japan. Are you not unhappy about the developments?
Well, first of all, you're asking me as Premier, not as one of the people of BC that got in on the distribution
You
of
got
shares.
your 5 shares.
Yeah, sure. So now, first of all, the principle of Brick. That was my concept.
Give me a laugh first, though. Will you concede you're the father instead of the delivery doctor?
No, I'm something like Dr. Defoe, but instead of quintuplets, we just have one large baby instead of 5 little ones. Now, the baby will grow up, and I think it's going to be a great thing for individual ownership in the province. And what I tried to tell the people is I don't believe in second-hand ownership through government. Own it in your own hands, because with the benefits of ownership go responsibilities of, just a second, of making sure that now your company responds to you. They can deal with their directors. If they are unhappy, now this gets into judgment decisions. If they're unhappy with their directors, they can replace them, they can add to them, or if they think they're doing a good job...
You're the biggest shareholder, sir.
We'll,
Dr. Defoe's government is the biggest shareholder.
Just a second, 5% of the shares, and if all the people had applied and taken up the share offer, we'd have none. And we didn't vote those shares, and that was on the principle that the people would vote and deal with their directors. I don't want the heavy hand of government in there. Now, that's number one. So the people, if they don't like the judgments of this company, which is not a government company.
Got to change the directors.
It's a, well, that would be their choice, a private company, public company in the private sector. Now, on the other hand, we have laws set up for all private sector companies under the Securities Commission and under the laws of the province that have accountability and very strict rules for directors of companies as to how they operate when they're conducting the business. Insider trading, etc. And that, they're subject to those rules, and if anybody in that company or in Macmillan Bloedel, or I'll just pick companies at random, or any of the companies that are in this province, make any transaction, they're all subject to the laws of the province. They aren't subject to the government whipping in at whim as Big Brother and saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. This is a good lesson in there. Now, people...
Sir, you've given me a very correct and properly technical answer, but surely you, sir, must be unhappy about the public concern over these revelations of brick deals. Surely you'd concede that, sir. You're giving the impression you don't mind about it.
Oh, sure. Listen, I'm always concerned. I'm the type that wanted brick to go up to be an honor student and go on to save the world.
You did take our assets and put them into brick and then give us them back in 5 shares, but they were government assets. I mean, it's not really a public company.
No such thing as government assets. There's assets of the people that you can give into individual ownership, or they can have in second.
People's assets into brick, sir.
Yeah, and they own it.
Anyway, you're going to let the natural course of events follow.
Oh, sure. I think
no interference with brick.
I'm not going to have any political interference. That would be the worst suggestion I can think of. Proper law and proper opportunity for the shareholders to take.
Kaiser goes to 55. Poor old brick. 637.
Well, you're asking me now to make a value judgment on whether it was good for the shareholders or not, and I'm not capable of doing that, nor am I prepared as the Premier. Now, if I was just an ordinary shareholder out there, I might have lots of ideas, and I might say, hey, Bill Bennett, you could run that company better than the directors, and maybe I might go out and campaign around the province for proxies to become a director and chairman and president, and
Next question,
hope I can do a better job.
One of your great techniques, and I'll say this publicly, is that once given an opening, you know, you'll go on quite logically for some time and prevent me getting my next little jab in.
I wouldn't do that.
Your Attorney General, Mr. Williams, appeared on this program for 45 heavy minutes when I questioned him at length on the Eckhardt inquiry and all that flew from that. Yeah. He told me that if there is further evidence, or that if evidence appears, which would... If the evidence appears, if further evidence appeared, he would consider and, if necessary, recommend a judicial inquiry. Do you subscribe to that view of Mr. Williams?
Oh, I support the Attorney General. I have great confidence in Alan Williams, both for his integrity and also members of the Attorney General's ministry who are there as public servants.
But as of this moment, as far as you're concerned, the Eckhardt, Gracie's finger bit is over and done.
Well, you know, it's separating evidence from hearsay and innuendo, and certainly these things are always difficult, but you know, the people of this province should say they're pretty happy to have an Attorney General like Alan Williams.
It was a pretty sharp development this morning, wiping out the Environment and Land Use Committee Secretariat. Why that all of a sudden? Does that not emasculate
it doesn't.
Environmental control?
No.
Land?
No. First of all, the Environment Land Use Committee that makes the decisions is Cabinet. And they're statutory. Certain ministries are members. That committee secretariat was set up because the government we replaced did not have a secretarial service for government, nor did they have a structure of cabinet committees. At least there wasn't any available when we came in. What we've done is we've set up cabinet committees. Intergovernmental ministry provides secretarial services. We have what we call the common resource use, multiple resource use of committees that deal when you're dealing with environmental matters or development matters. We set up a Ministry of the Environment, which they never had before. So really, these same people will be utilized and their expertise but in a proper structure. What was happening is it was trying to duplicate what was being done in the line ministry.
You've wiped out the duplication, but you haven't saved any jobs.
Well, we will in the long run, because we will save them, but what we aren't doing is throwing those people on the market. They'll be utilized, but they won't have to be replaced.
My thanks to Premier Bill Bennett of British Columbia. Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Thank you,
I'll be
Chair.
back after the break. I'll be back with the Webster program Monday morning. Haven't time even to tell you what it is at 9 a.m. precisely.